Hi, I'm the daughter who got left on the floor with a broken leg because I dared to defend myself. My stepfather kicked me. My mother watched. Then they both walked out. Not to get help, not to look back, just left me there like trash. And you know what's worse than pain? The silence after. The kind that makes you wonder, was I ever loved at all? They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd crawl away like I always did. But this time I made one call, and everything changed. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. Because trust me, this story, it doesn't end the way they hoped. It was just past 6 when I walked through the front door. The light outside had turned that soft golden shade that only lasts a few minutes in Texas, right before dusk when the sun dips and everything looks kind for a moment. But inside the house, it was the same as always. Stiff, still. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you walked in on something, but no one will say what. The living room smelled like microwaved lasagna and old furniture. The TV played low, some reality show about couples yelling at each other, and the volume dropped the second my keys hit the bowl by the door. That part wasn't new. They always turned the TV down when I walked in, like my presence required adjusting. I took off my shoes and left them by the rug, next to a pair of my sister's fuzzy slippers. Hers looked placed. Mine always looked like they'd been dropped. I crossed through the hallway, avoiding the one floorboard that creaked loudest, even though I knew no one cared if I made noise. It was just habit. A survival rhythm I hadn't unlearned. I'd just turned 42 last month. No party, no cake. Just a group text from coworkers and a coupon from a grocery store I rarely shopped at. I'd lived in this house, temporarily, for 6 years. That's what I'd told my friends, and that's what I still told myself. Temporary, like this would all pass if I waited long enough. On the kitchen counter, I noticed a grocery list written in my mother's handwriting. Eggs, milk, paper towels, orange juice. I leaned in, scanned it. Then I scanned it again. No, Sarah's coffee. She used to write that, every week without fail. Sarah's coffee, even though I always bought it myself. Seeing it written down made me feel like I belonged here in some small, stupid way. But now it wasn't there. I didn't ask. I didn't say a word. I just folded the list in half and tucked it under the fruit bowl like it didn't matter. That's the thing about being ignored. You learn to pretend you're the one choosing silence. My stepfather sat in his chair, just like he always did, legs spread, arms draped heavy over the armrests like a king on a throne. He didn't glance up when I passed, didn't acknowledge me. He cleared his throat, then mumbled something toward the TV. My sister, Emily, laughed from the couch and tossed a piece of popcorn at him. She had her knees tucked up under a blanket, hair still damp from her shower. She'd moved back in 6 months ago after her second divorce, and somehow she still had her own room. I, on the other hand, stayed in the converted laundry space behind the garage, the one with the broken window latch. "Dinner's in the fridge," Emily called out without looking at me. I didn't answer. I knew better than to take that as an invitation. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter facing the room, watching them. "You didn't call Mrs. Nolan back," my mother said as she walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. "She left a message on the landline, again." "I'll handle it tomorrow," I replied, barely audible. She stopped mid-step. "Tomorrow? Sarah, she's been waiting all week. You said Tuesday. Now it's Friday." I kept my eyes on the floor. I hated when she said my name like that. Like she was reminding herself who I was, or why I was still here. Then she added, like it was the weather, "You're always the problem. You know that, right?" Just like that. No heat in her voice, no malice. Just a sentence she'd said 100 times in 100 different ways. And the worst part? It didn't hurt the same anymore. It landed like background noise, irritating, familiar, inevitable. I wanted to say something, to remind her that I was the one who helped her through her last surgery, that I took off work to drive her to appointments, that I covered Emily's share of the utility bill last month. But what would be the point? I set my glass down and placed my keys, my one consistent gesture, on the corner of the counter, exactly where I always did, lined up just so. I didn't know if anyone noticed, but I did it anyway, every day, like staking my claim, silently. The conversation continued without me. Emily asked if they wanted to watch something funny. My mother nodded, then scrolled through the remote. My stepfather cleared his throat again and said, "Nothing with that whiny woman." And they all chuckled. I watched from the doorway, not angry, not sad, just removed. Later, I sat on the edge of my cot in the back room, hands resting on my thighs. The air smelled like detergent and old drywall. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator bleeding through the wall. Out there, the house had gone quiet again. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that makes you brace yourself. Like the air just before a storm hits. The kind that makes your skin twitch without knowing why. I told myself that staying quiet was the safest choice. I wish I could say that silence saved me that night, that holding my tongue earned me peace or bought me safety. But it didn't. The morning after, the house felt heavier than usual. Not louder, just more loaded. Like even the air had an opinion and I wasn't on its side. I moved around quietly, careful not to scrape the chair too loud or let the cabinet door shut with a thud. My coffee tasted off. Maybe it was the brand Emily bought. Or maybe bitterness settles in deeper once it knows it's welcome. She came in a few minutes later, barefoot, phone in hand, giggling at something on the screen. She looked right past me, as if I were just part of the kitchen furniture. "Oh," she said, reaching into the fridge. "You didn't leave any of the cream I like." I hadn't touched her cream, but I didn't bother arguing. I just took another sip of my coffee, trying not to let my lips curl. She leaned against the counter, scrolled for a second, then glanced up with that same amused smirk I'd come to hate. "By the way," she added, "Mom said you forgot to take the trash out. Again." I had taken it out, just like I always did. "I did," I said calmly. She chuckled. "Sure, whatever helps you sleep." Then she walked out like that was the end of it. That was her game, casual sabotage wrapped in sweet tones. She didn't yell, she didn't throw things. She dripped poison in teaspoons, jokes with jagged edges, accusations that looked like concern. And I responded with grace, or at least, that's what I called it. Saying nothing, smiling thinly, making room for her mood. At noon, we were all in the living room, Mom, Emily, and me. The Weather Channel murmured in the background. Emily was talking about a trip she never finished planning. Mom was only half listening, flipping through a magazine she never subscribed to. "I'm just saying," Emily laughed. "You remember that time Sarah tried to make pancakes and nearly set the kitchen on fire? That never happened. I knew that story wasn't mine. That was her. At 16, I'd been the one cleaning up the mess while she cried and blamed the stove. I looked at Mom. She smiled, not at me, but at the memory she chose to believe. "I didn't do that," I said softly. Emily didn't miss a beat. "Yes, you did. Don't be so dramatic." Mom shook her head and let out a chuckle. "You've always been so sensitive, Sarah. Always have to make it about you." I sat back, unsure if I'd actually forgotten something or if they'd just convinced me it had happened. My thoughts twisted in on themselves. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd misremembered. That's what they did. Rewrote the past like it was a group project and I'd been the only one not invited to edit. Later that day, I tried to leave the house for a walk, just to clear my head. As I reached for my keys on the kitchen counter, my mother called out from the other room. "Can you take Emily to the pharmacy? She doesn't feel like driving." I froze for a second. I was about to go out for a walk. "She's had a long week, Sarah. Be the bigger person." There it was again. That phrase, be the bigger person. Like maturity meant swallowing every insult. Like being a decent adult required letting yourself rot quietly. I dropped my keys back onto the counter. "Sure," I said. "Of course." In the car, Emily stayed glued to her phone. No thank you, no small talk, just scrolling and sighing and changing the radio station without asking. At the pharmacy, I waited outside in the heat while she picked up something she refused to explain. When she came back, she threw the bag onto the dashboard. "You parked crooked," she said, not looking at me. "I parked fine." She snorted. "Yeah, you would think that." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Is this about earlier?" I asked. "What?" "The pancakes. You know that was your story, not mine." She turned her head slowly. "Seriously? You're still hung up on that? God, no wonder people can't stand being around you." I didn't respond. We drove home in silence. That night, I stayed up later than usual. My room behind the garage felt smaller than ever. The fan clanked softly overhead. I kept thinking about all the times I'd let things slide. All the moments I'd bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron. I remembered being 12 and getting blamed for stealing cash from Mom's purse. Emily's idea, my punishment. I remembered how I cried and apologized anyway, just to make it stop. The thing is, people love you more when you make yourself smaller. But I was tired. The next day, she cornered me near the laundry. Just the two of us. "You left the washer running," she said. "Again. Don't you know how to live in a house without ruining it?" I hadn't done that either. But what came next wasn't about washing machines. She leaned in close, her voice low and sharp. "Honestly, Sarah, I think Mom regrets ever having you." She said it with a smile, a half laugh, like she was just sharing a secret I'd been too dumb to notice. Something inside me didn't just crack, it shifted. I didn't slap her, not yet. I just stared at her, long enough that she blinked and stepped back. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered. "It's not my fault you're everyone's burden." She walked away. I stood still, heart pounding. Not because I was scared, but because I was finally awake. Later, alone in my room, I traced the timeline. Every insult, every rewrite, every little thing that chipped away at who I used to be. They were going to talk about the slap like it came out of nowhere. But it wasn't the beginning. It was just the first thing anyone else saw. By then, my silence had already cost me more than my anger ever would. I didn't sleep the night before. My body stayed still, but my mind kept rewinding, frame by frame, every look, every word, every time I'd swallowed something sharp and called it maturity. By morning, I was running on coffee and restraint. Emily was already in the kitchen when I came in, barefoot, humming to herself while slicing a peach she probably didn't pay for. The light through the blinds striped the counter like prison bars. My mother sat nearby, flipping through the newspaper like it was any other day. I moved to get my own coffee. The air between us held a charge. Nothing visible, just static waiting to spark. "You know," Emily said casually, not looking at me, "if you're gonna stay here, maybe don't leave your crap all over the living room." I hadn't. The only thing I left out was a blanket, because I'd fallen asleep on the couch after cleaning up the dishes. But I didn't say that. I sipped my coffee instead. "I folded it," I said. "Last night." "You call that folded?" She laughed, glancing at Mom, like she was inviting her in on the joke. Mom didn't say anything. She just raised her eyebrows, her mouth pressed tight. It would have ended there, Should've. But Emily kept going. Honestly, it's not that hard. Maybe if you weren't so busy feeling sorry for yourself, you'd do something useful around here. That was her skill, hitting you where you couldn't defend without sounding petty. So I stayed quiet, again, until she stepped closer. You know, she added, lowering her voice just enough to make sure it stung. If Dad were still alive, you think he'd be proud of this version of you? That was it. Not the comment, not even the tone. It was the casual use of Dad, like she owned the word. Like he'd been hers and I was just squatting in a memory I didn't deserve. The slap came before I realized it was happening. It wasn't dramatic, no buildup, just the sound of skin meeting skin, my palm against her cheek. She stumbled back a step, wide-eyed. I froze. Mom gasped. My stepfather, who had just stepped into the kitchen from the hallway, didn't gasp, didn't shout. He moved fast like he'd been waiting. I turned toward him just as his boot came up. He didn't yell a word, just kicked. The pain didn't hit right away. I remember thinking for a second that maybe it didn't land as hard as it looked. But then my knee buckled. My right leg gave out completely. I hit the floor, landing awkwardly, my elbow slamming into tile. The world went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. I could hear my own breathing. I looked up. Mom was just standing there. Jesus, Emily whispered, holding her cheek. Then Mom's voice broke the stillness. You deserved it, she said, her voice sharp, cold. You go reflect on yourself. That was it. Not, are you okay? Not, what the hell just happened? Not even anger, just dismissal. I was on the floor, my legs screaming, and no one looked at me. My stepfather walked past me like I was a rug someone had tripped over. Emily stood by the sink, dabbing her cheek like she'd been the victim. Mom turned to leave. You bring this into the house, Sarah. You always have. You should be ashamed. They all filed out, one by one. The front door opened, then closed. I stayed there, trying to shift, trying to sit up. Pain radiated down from my knee into my ankle. I tried to test weight on it, stupidly, out of instinct, and nearly blacked out. I crawled to the cabinet and pulled myself upright just enough to reach the counter. My phone wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I'd left it charging in the other room. So I waited. For what? I don't know. Maybe I thought someone would come back. Maybe they'd remember I was there, like someone forgetting they left the oven on. But no one came. I heard a car start. Then it pulled out of the driveway. That was the moment I understood I was truly alone. They didn't even slam the door, just the soft click of it closing behind them. That sound echoed louder than any scream ever could. I stayed there, sprawled across the kitchen tile, one leg twisted under me in a way that didn't feel right. The cold of the floor seeped through my clothes. I don't remember blinking. My eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, following the faint lines where plaster met paint. I told myself if I didn't move, the pain would stop sharpening. That if I stayed still long enough, someone would come back. But no one did. Time slowed until it no longer made sense. Minutes dissolved into hours, or maybe it was the other way around. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was punishing. It pressed down on me, folding in from every wall. Even the fridge, the clock, the street outside, all of it had gone mute. I don't know how long I lay there before my body began to feel again. At first, it was dull pressure. Then the ache bloomed. My knee throbbed. A sharp jolt traveled down my shin every time I shifted even slightly. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, hard, and tasted blood. It gave me something real to hold on to. I tried to sit up, failed. The muscles in my good leg burned with effort. My palms slipped against the smooth tile, damp from sweat and whatever else had pooled beneath me. I tried again, made it up halfway, before the pain in my leg roared and stole my breath. So I gave up. That was the moment I knew they weren't coming back. Not in 5 minutes, not after cooling off, not to check if I needed help. They left me here on purpose. The silence of the house wasn't emptiness. It was decision. The living room lights still flickered faintly from the motion sensor lamp, mocking me. My keys were still where I'd left them on the kitchen counter. I stared at them for a long time. So close. But might as well have been in another state. It wasn't even midnight yet. Outside, cars occasionally passed down the road, their headlights throwing shadows across the walls. I used to love those quiet suburban evenings, the way they wrapped around the house like a blanket. But now it felt like a trap. The comfort had curdled. I kept replaying the slap in my head over and over. The sound, the look on Emily's face. The way she pulled back like I'd struck her with a brick instead of my hand. Did I go too far? Then the kick. That was harder to justify. I didn't see it coming, didn't even process it until I was on the floor. Still, a part of me whispered, maybe you should have known better. Maybe if I had just walked away, kept my mouth shut. Maybe if I hadn't made her look bad. Maybe... I stopped myself. That's how it always started. I'd been trained, little by little, to turn every wound inward. They didn't have to hit me with words anymore. I'd learned how to bruise myself with my own thoughts. It was dark now. I could see the clock on the microwave glowing in green. 12:47 a.m. No sound from upstairs. No. Lights flicked back on. No door opened again. Not even a text. The silence stretched on so long, it started to feel like it was part of the house itself. An old, stale breath held in the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I wanted to, but I didn't. Because something told me it wouldn't change a thing. If I screamed, no one would hear me. Or worse, they would. And still not come. So I did what I'd been taught to do best. I stayed quiet. I lay there in that silence, swallowing back everything I wanted to yell into the night. I thought of childhood birthdays when they forgot to buy my cake, of sitting in the back seat while Emily got to ride up front, of all the dinners I cooked but never got thanked for, of the time Mom told me, "Not everything is about you," after I cried at Dad's funeral. All of it rushed in that moment. And yet, I stayed still. The night dragged its heels. I watched the shadows on the wall shift, then fade. And then, through the cracks in the blinds, light began to filter in. Soft, pale, morning. The light touched the same corners the shadows had just held hostage. Still no sound, no keys in the door, no returning car. They were gone. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. The house wasn't a home. It never was. It was a stage where I was cast as the problem, the one always too much, too sensitive, too angry, too weak, too everything. And they left me on the floor like a broken plate they didn't want to clean up. Something in me shifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about a slap. It was a message. They had chosen this. That was when I reached for my phone. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the same contact I hadn't used in 3 years. I knew the number by heart. I didn't even need to look. But I did, because something in me still hesitated. Like opening this door meant becoming someone I'd promised myself I'd outgrown. There was no one else I could call. Not my mother, not my sister. Definitely not him. And I knew. Once I made this call, something would shift in a way that couldn't be undone. The phone rang twice. "Yeah?" His voice was groggy, but alert enough. I didn't even say his name, just breathed in, slow and shaky. "It's me." A pause. I could almost hear him sitting upright. "Where are you?" "In the house." My voice cracked. "Still on the floor?" Another silence. He didn't ask what I meant, didn't rush in with noise or panic, Just quiet, heavy quiet, the kind that listens closely. He kicked me. My eyes welled up again, but I didn't cry. My leg's bad, I can't move. They left me. Still nothing on the line, just breathing. Then finally, is the door locked? No. Is anyone else there? No, they're gone, since last night. I could tell he was already moving. I heard the shift of fabric, the creak of his old couch. He was writing something down or typing. Tell me exactly what hurts. My knee. Something cracked, I think. I exhaled. It's the right leg. I can't straighten it. How long have you been there? Since before midnight. It's light out now. I hated hearing myself say that. It made it more real. He swore under his breath, but then his voice returned steady, low, controlled. I'm sending an ambulance. They'll knock, don't panic. I'll be there too, but let them in first. I don't want cops. Then tell the paramedics that. I'll take care of the rest. Another pause. You said they left you? Yes. Just like that? Just like that. There was one more sentence that had been sitting in my chest all night, and I knew if I didn't say it now, it would never leave me. Don't let a single one of that family walk away. It didn't come out like a threat. It was quiet, even almost tired. But I meant every word, not out of rage, but because I'd finally crossed the line from hoping they'd change to knowing they never would. I hear you, he said. Simple, final. This wasn't the version of him most people knew, not the stories they whispered about when they thought I wasn't listening. He didn't yell, didn't talk about payback. He asked for details, addresses, what hospital I wanted, what I remembered exactly about what happened. He was thinking in systems. He'd walked away from the gang life years ago, after a sentence that should have broken him. He came out quiet, harder in some ways, smarter in all others. And, in all that time, I'd never asked him for anything. But this was different. He said he'd be there within the hour. I didn't ask how. I knew he meant it. After I hung up, I stayed still for a few more minutes. Not from pain, though it throbbed through my whole side like a drumbeat. I stayed still because, for the first time in a long time, I felt something anchor inside me. Not rage, not fear, belief. Someone believed me, fully. No doubt, no minimizing, no, maybe you're overreacting. That belief wrapped around me like a second skin. It didn't erase the pain, but it made me feel real again. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. I heard their feet on the steps, heard the knock I'd been waiting on for nearly 9 hours. By the time the paramedics carried me out, I understood this wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger than the pain in my leg or the betrayal that burned behind my ribs. Something had cracked open, and this time I wasn't going to let anyone pretend it didn't happen. The emergency room lights hit me like a slap. Everything looked too white, too sharp, like the world had been scrubbed clean of softness. It smelled like bleach and metal and something else I couldn't name. My eyes had trouble adjusting after being stuck in the dark for so long. They wheeled me in past strangers who didn't know me and didn't ask why I looked like I did. But they didn't have to. My leg told the story without me saying a word. A nurse came over with scissors. I need to cut this pant leg, okay? I nodded. It was already ruined anyway. Torn at the knee, soaked with something that had dried too dark to just be dirt. She peeled the fabric away gently, but I still winced. The second she saw the way my leg bent wrong, the way the skin had ballooned and purpled, her face changed. No shock, just quiet knowing. No one asked, "What did you do?" No one looked at me like I was exaggerating. A second nurse came over, then a third. A doctor followed. They didn't crowd me, but they moved fast. Orders were called out in short, clipped voices. Someone brought ice. Someone else brought forms. One nurse whispered something to another, who turned and left quickly. I didn't even notice when the first one asked, "Did someone do this to you?" I blinked. My lips were dry. "Yes," I whispered, "my stepfather." She didn't react much, just nodded and wrote it down. Then, softly, she asked, "Are you safe now?" "No," I said, before I could think. "But my brother's coming." That was the moment it became real. Saying it out loud pulled it from some foggy place in my head and pinned it to the air. And once it was out there, I couldn't take it back. I didn't want to. They brought a clipboard. A woman in scrubs sat beside me, patient but firm. "We're going to document this. Everything. It matters," she said. I told her the truth. I didn't dramatize. I didn't downplay. I said what happened, word for word, the slap, the kick, the leg, the door shutting behind them. My voice didn't shake. My hands did, a little, but my voice stayed steady. She asked for names. I gave them. She asked when it happened. I gave her the time. She asked if there had been other incidents. I nodded. Every answer turned into words on a page, time-stamped, official. Something I could point to later if anyone dared say I was lying. It felt like armor, not because it would protect me from everything, but because it was proof. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't just too sensitive like they always said. Not long after that, the messages started, first from my mother. "Are you okay?" No apology, no ownership. Then from my sister. "You know I didn't mean it like that. You always overreact." Classic. I stared at the screen and didn't reply. I didn't have the energy to translate their fake concern into real comfort. They were only reaching out now because someone else had seen the damage. Now that it was official, now they cared. But this time, I didn't explain myself. I let the system speak for me. The medical forms, the injury report. The police contact form I hadn't even filled out yet, but knew I would. That silence, the kind I gave them now, felt cleaner than any fight I could have started. Then I looked up and saw my brother. He walked in without rushing, without storming. Just a quiet presence in the chaos. His eyes swept the room, then landed on me. He didn't look furious. He looked focused. And in that moment, I realized something simple and sharp. Protection doesn't have to be loud. That was when I learned the truth scares people more than anger ever could. And when they figured out that truth had paperwork behind it, they panicked. The calls didn't stop after I gave my formal hospital statement. If anything, they multiplied. My phone buzzed so often I stopped checking who it was. My mother, my sister, even numbers I didn't recognize. All of them pinged one after another like they were on a schedule. At first, I thought they were worried about me. Naive. The second I opened a few messages, I saw what they were really doing. My stepfather said it was an accident. He said I had slipped, and he had tried to catch me. His knee just happened to knock into mine. He said it with such precision, like he'd practiced. My sister told someone I'd been emotionally unstable for years, and that I had overreacted again. Again. Each new version of the story had fewer sharp edges. They were trying to sand down what happened until it looked smooth enough to ignore. The hospital wasn't buying it. One of the doctors gently told me I'd need to give a formal statement for their report. "It matters," she said. "This isn't just for us. It could be used later. So just tell it exactly as it happened." She gave me a clipboard and privacy, but I felt anything but private. My hands shook as I wrote. I kept crossing out and rewriting, scared a wrong word could turn truth into confusion. I read it 3 times before handing it back. Then I signed. Once it was filed, it was real in a way no scream ever had been. That made them more nervous than I expected. A day later, a nurse mentioned something strange while adjusting the monitor next to my bed. "This isn't the first time, is it?" I looked up. "What?" She didn't look at me directly. "You've been seen here before, a few years back. Broken wrist, bruised ribs. Those records weren't marked as abuse, but they're still in the system. My breath caught in my throat. Those times, I'd explained them away. A fall here, a kitchen accident. I'd convinced myself they weren't patterns. But now they were. It didn't feel like validation, it felt like dread. Because if it had been happening this long, and I hadn't stopped it, what else had I been wrong about? My brother sat with me while I processed that. Quiet, present. He didn't offer platitudes, just stayed in the room like someone ready to listen if I ever chose to talk. But the one person I wanted to say something didn't. My mother refused to confirm anything. When questioned by a social worker who called her for verification, she simply said, "I wasn't there when it happened." Not a lie, not the truth either, just silence. That silence hurt more than anything she could have said, because she knew what she saw, she knew what it meant, and still, she chose to disappear inside her own denial. That's when the tone shifted, not in what they said, but how they said it. My sister sent me a message that read, "I'm not trying to scare you, but you know how much this could ruin for everyone." Not a threat, but not innocent either. Others started using phrases like family reputation and consequences we'll all have to live with. It was all so polite, so clean, and underneath it, sharp as broken glass. Part of me wanted to cave, to say, fine, maybe this was too much. Maybe I was making a mess bigger than it needed to be. But then I thought about that hospital report, about the nurse who remembered my wrist, about my brother's steady presence, and I waited. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't delete the messages, I just let the silence stretch. Because sometimes letting people talk long enough is how the truth floats to the surface. They thought they had contained the damage. What they didn't understand was that damage doesn't stay put once it's been written down. They moved first. I learned that the hard way, sitting in a narrow office that smelled like old coffee and paper, my leg propped on a chair that didn't quite fit. Before I could even get settled, documents slid across the table. Allegations, motions, a neat little stack that turned me from a patient into a problem. Suddenly, I wasn't the injured one. I was unstable. I was aggressive. I was someone who reacted poorly under stress. Those words landed heavier than I expected, not because they were true, but because they were familiar. I'd been wearing those labels my whole life. Seeing them typed out felt like watching an old lie get a fresh coat of paint. My stepfather's attorney spoke smoothly, like he was explaining something obvious to a child. He framed the kick as reflex, the injury as unfortunate timing. He used phrases like mutual escalation and loss of control. I noticed he never said my name. My sister followed his lead. Her statement was careful and practiced, the kind of story that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. She talked about fear, about how she'd felt threatened, about how I'd always had a temper. She didn't look at me once while she said it. For a moment, the room tilted. I felt that old doubt creep in, the one that asks if maybe I should have known better. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Maybe pushing back had only made things worse. I thought about settling, just ending it, walking away with whatever scraps of peace they were willing to offer. The idea was tempting in the way exhaustion always is. I was tired of being the center of something ugly. That's when my brother spoke. He hadn't said much until then. He'd listened, hands folded, eyes steady. When he finally leaned forward, it wasn't dramatic. He didn't raise his voice or posture. He simply clarified. He said there were medical records. He said there were timestamps that couldn't be argued with. He said once something is documented, it stops being a story and starts being a fact. Then he went quiet again. The temperature in the room changed. You could feel it. Like when a storm passes overhead and the air shifts all at once. The attorney paused, Just for a second, long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. That's when the evidence came out. Not all at once, not theatrically, just piece by piece, laid down with care. Hospital intake times. Photographs taken before swelling had a chance to distort the truth. Archived messages I'd sent friends over the years, brushing off injuries I shouldn't have had to explain. Notes from a nurse who remembered more than I thought anyone had. No one argued with the dates. They couldn't. I watched my stepfather's confidence drain away in real time. His shoulders dropped, his jaw tightened. My sister stared at the table like it might swallow her whole. For the first time, no one interrupted me. No one talked over my words or corrected my memory. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. Power didn't slam into place. It settled, quietly, the way it does when it finally knows where it belongs. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I said what I would accept and what I wouldn't. I didn't ask for apologies. I didn't demand understanding. I chose distance. I chose consequences that didn't require shouting. I stood up on my crutches, steadier than I expected. I looked around the room one last time and realized something important. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, and they knew it. That was when I decided how this would end. Not with forgiveness, but with finality. That's how I chose to end it. I didn't want their remorse. I didn't wait for it. I didn't need them to understand or feel sorry. What I needed was for it to be over, for the truth to land and stay, like a stone at the bottom of a river. Done. 3 months passed between that day in the legal office and the final hearing. Things moved slow and quiet, the way real justice often does. No cameras, no headlines. Just a courtroom with bad lighting and a clerk who barely looked up. The rulings came down without ceremony. Restraining orders were granted. Charges were filed. Some stuck, some didn't. My stepfather walked out with a criminal record and a permanent mark next to his name. My sister's testimony fell apart when crossed against her own text messages. She left the courthouse early, head down, avoiding every eye in the room. The judge didn't say anything dramatic, but he didn't need to. It was all there, in the stamped documents, the official words, credible, sustained, not retaliatory. No confetti, no parade, just closure that finally made a sound. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I just sat there, breathing through the echo of a fight I no longer had to explain. A week after everything was finalized, I got a letter. Handwritten, but not personal. My mother's handwriting, familiar and still oddly neat. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't take responsibility. What she asked for was something softer, peace. She wrote that she missed me, that the past had been hard on everyone, that maybe we could just let things go now. She never said what she saw that night. She never said the words that might have changed everything. Instead, she left them out, as if silence could blur the details enough to move on. I folded the letter once and put it in the kitchen drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't burn it either. It didn't deserve fire or ceremony, just distance. Sometimes people don't lie. They just refuse to remember out loud. I still think about that morning sometimes. The way the light hit the floorboards, the cold tile against my cheek, the pain pulsing through my leg before I even opened my eyes. But the memory doesn't pull me under anymore. It lives in me, sure, but not with power, more like a scar. Closed, healed, a part of me that no longer stings when touched. I moved out of San Antonio a month after the case closed. Found a small rental a few hours south near the coast. Nothing special. 2 rooms, a little porch, silence. I started a job at a library. Not glamorous, but steady. I liked the rhythm of it. Books didn't argue. They didn't rewrite the truth. They just sat there, waiting for someone to look closely. I didn't tell many people where I went. My brother knows. A few close friends. That's it. I didn't vanish, I just stopped explaining, stopped justifying. I let the boundaries speak for themselves. I still get the occasional message from someone in the family orbit, an aunt who just wants to check in, a cousin with a birthday invite, always laced with that subtle tug. Can't we just go back? But I don't go back, I go forward. The hardest part of surviving wasn't the pain. It wasn't the broken bone or the bruises or the courtroom. It was choosing not to become like them, not to strike back harder, not to rot in anger, because that's what they count on, your silence or your rage. Either one keeps the cycle going, but I didn't scream. I didn't disappear. I stood still and let the truth do what it does when it's finally spoken in the right room, at the right time. And I'm still here. That's the part no one expected. That I'd survive and still be myself. That I'd laugh again. That I'd build something better without needing to tear anyone else down. I talk to other women now. Quiet conversations, late-night messages, moments in hallways where someone leans in and says, I think it's happening to me too. I don't give them advice. I give them space. I tell them what someone once told me. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. Sometimes that's all it takes to start. To whoever's listening, maybe you've lived it, or maybe you've barely found the words for it, hear me now. Silence doesn't make you loyal. It just makes you hurt longer. And you don't owe anyone your body, your peace, or your history. You can walk away. You can walk toward something else. Some families teach you love. Others teach you how to leave and live.